Hello and welcome to our very first edition of Inside INFFs. My name is Lucy Martin and I am the INFF Communications Lead. Today I am joined by Nabila Aguele, who is the Special Assistant to the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget, National Planning in Nigeria. So Nabila, hi and welcome, and thanks for joining me. Where are you joining us from today?
Hi, I'm joining from Abuja, Nigeria. I'm actually in the ministry right now.
Great, amazing. That was my best newscaster impression. I shouldn't quit my day job is basically the gist of that. I just wanted to start out with some context setting. One of the key things about an INFF is that no INFF looks the same. Each INFF is different in every single country. So it's really important for us to get a feel for the context in Nigeria. I'm wondering if you could just take us through where Nigeria is in its development trajectory. What are some of the challenges you have today, some of the historical challenges in terms of financing for development, and how the INFF fits in with all this?
So Nigeria, as most know, is Africa's most populous country with a large, strong GDP base, lots of potential. And where we are is we have actually quite a sophisticated SDG implementation setup. We have an established Office of a Senior Special Assistant on the SDGs, which works across federal and state and local government to coordinate our work towards achieving the SDGs. Within the federal government, we have the Ministry of Budget, National Planning, and Finance, which acts as a coordinator and helps to ensure alignment between our SDG goals, our budgets, and what's happening at the state level. Now, historically in Nigeria, we've had a domestic revenue mobilization challenge. So even coming into the COVID-19 pandemic period, the Honorable Minister and other cabinet officials have been consistently looking to improve the revenue base, address issues of domestic revenue mobilization. And so with respect to the SDG financing gap, just like pretty much all countries in the world at this point, especially post-COVID, there has been a gap.
Can you walk me through some of the logic behind introducing an INFF within that already quite expensive SDG implementation architecture? What was the perceived value that an INFF could add to this? And was there skepticism at the beginning?
The one thing I would say is the leadership from the minister, the strong leadership, the strong buy-in at that highest level, both from the Honorable Minister and also from the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs and other senior members of the steering co. I mean, that really sets a very strong tone. For her, this was a no-brainer. What the INFF really has done, and I think especially as we continue through the process, more and more stakeholders are starting to really understand and really see the value. It has allowed us to bring a cross-section of stakeholders together at one table. I think at one of our steering committee meetings, it may have been the country head of the World Bank commented that this was the first time he had sat on a steerco that involved government officials, development partners, private sector, all at the table at the same time. And I think in my presentation, I said everyone having a seat at that table has been what's critical, and looking holistically at the financing challenges and looking not just at government as the sole source of financing, but saying we have private sector here, we have partners here, we have civil society here. How are we going to examine our issues and come together and proffer integrated solutions, which can then feed into not only our national development planning process, but other planning and financing processes in the country?
A lot of countries are starting on their financing strategy now, or they are in the process of planning that. I'm wondering if you could just take me through your approach for developing the financing strategy, and also making sure that that's an inclusive process.
The process has been, again, series of in-depth one-on-one discussions, basically leveraging the development finance assessment. So I think different countries do it differently. I think some countries maybe don't start with a DFA. In Nigeria, for us, doing an initial baseline setting analysis made a lot of sense. We're a large economy. There's so many moving parts, and especially post-COVID, it was really important to take stock. So I would say for a lot of countries, having that initial assessment done, particularly post-COVID, is really useful because you're not then under pressure to do both the assessment and the development of the financing strategy as one step. And you can kind of take a step back, really look at that, and then do a further deep dive with stakeholders. So our development and financing assessment brought up some key thematic areas: the issue of financing, where do we get revenues from, how do we leverage existing structures, how do we unlock revenue potential in the economy that has not been fully tapped, issues around strengthening the link between our planning and our financing processes, public-private coordination, untapping the great potential of the private sector to finance and drive implementation in key sectors, and then transparency and accountability. So having those themes sort of begin to inform the financing strategy conversations, we found that it was really an iterative process, right? So, you can imagine when you're having a series of conversations with stakeholders, instead of coming to them at one time for everything, you're able to unlock different layers of information than you would if you kind of rushed it all and condensed the timeline.
How do you raise awareness at the state level and not frame it as an added burden, but as something that is actually there to empower states to finance their own development?
Another thing that we did as part of our financing strategy was a real deep dive with our state governments. So we organized a workshop, and at that workshop, we had represented commissioners of finance, as well as commissioners of budget and planning, and also representatives from state level offices of the SDGs. Everyone was there. And again, somebody commented during that workshop that this was the first time that they had actually interacted with all of the commissioners, all of the SDG teams. And it was actually one of the few times that they had all interacted with each other. Those conversations were really rich. You had everything from knowledge sharing, best practices sharing. The state stakeholders felt it was an opportunity to even express to us at the federal level some of the challenges they'd had with coordination and engagement even with us. And really, the idea was to begin to have a real understanding from the perspectives of those actually doing the work at the state level of what are the challenges that they're facing. And they're going to be really the ones to implement this at the state level. So it's sort of a two-way process where we're gaining an understanding which would inform the financing strategy, but then also building a sense of community and ownership and capacity for those who are actually going to implement this. Because the truth is, it's going to be implemented at the state level, and it has to be if it will succeed.
If there are three key elements or insights or pieces of advice for other countries going through the INFF process, headline insights, what would those three things be?
In terms of key takeaways, I think the lessons are still the same. The process has to be government-led. I think that's sort of critical. Partners are there to support and to help us, as are the private sector. They have a seat at the table. They're an important part of the conversation. But for those who need to implement this, our government stakeholders, particularly those who are part of the core public service. So ensuring that it's government-led and making sure that you leverage existing government systems to ensure sustainability beyond the current cohort of actors who are maybe starting the work. That's something that's been very front and center in our minds and really informed the design of the INFF. Taking a real iterative process, leveraging the DFA process, having a mix of one-on-one interactions, group interactions, workshops, coming back to the, mixing stakeholders together, relevant stakeholders, so that they can have an interesting conversation, which would unearth some of the more complicated and nuanced issues. That has been really useful for us. Of course, leveraging the existing structures, both at the state and the federal level, and taking the time to really build capacity and awareness around stakeholders and their understanding that the INFF is a framework that allows us to address and make more efficient processes that are already underway. So those are some of the key takeaways. And then also, I think a key takeaway that came out of the regional workshop is regional engagement, more opportunities to learn directly from those government stakeholders how their experience has been and see what you can kind of borrow or share. That's another lesson that's really worked well for us in Nigeria.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was like a wealth of insight and information. And I think that a lot of countries are going to find this incredibly interesting. You have a lot of work cut out for you, but it just sounds so exciting. And we're really looking forward to following you on this journey. Yeah, it's going to be great. And we're really looking forward to what happens next year. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for being on our first episode of Inside INFF.